好的，现场尊敬的各位来宾、女士们、先生们，2019青岛国际 VR 影像周 AR and MR 峰会正式开始。Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the SIF 2019 AR and MR Summit has officially begun. 那接下来的时间，先让我们进入到今天的第一个主题演讲——设计混合现实家庭剧场。Okay, now let's start with the first presentation, XR Home Theater. 让我们用热烈的掌声有请我们今天下午第一位分享嘉宾 Sean Stewart, Magic Leap 创意总监。Okay, let's give a warm applause to welcome Sean Stewart, the creative director at Magic Leap, the first sharing guest to welcome.
Thanks for having me here. Okay. The opening slide here is from a book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. It's a book I read when I was 8 years old, and it's part of the things that changed my life. It opens with this girl, Lucy, who is also 8 years old, who's playing hide and seek in an old house. And she goes to hide in the closet, and at the back of the closet, she finds a doorway into an amazing magical world. I cannot tell you how much I wanted to find a doorway into an amazing magical world when I was 8. So much so that when I failed, and believe me, I looked, I decided that I would grow up to be a person who wrote this kind of book. And that's what I did. I became a writer, and I wrote a whole bunch of fantasy novels about people who get to go to amazing places, because I wanted it myself so badly. When I was here to speak last year, I suggested that we now began to have the technology where instead of reading about Lucy going to Narnia or reading about Harry going to Hogwarts, we should be able to give you that experience yourself. This year, I can actually show you some of the tools that we've made at Magic Leap and that other people are making that will allow us to do that for real. Before I get into the nuts and bolts, I'm going to talk just a tiny bit about the landscape we find ourselves in and what making art means in this age of the world. If you were here last year, you may remember this slide. It basically says, in the old days, I made a book or a movie, and then the audience came and they were happy to see my book or movie. When I was a kid, I wanted to watch The Wonderful World of Disney TV show, and to do that, I had to sit in front of my television at 6 p.m. on Sunday night if I wanted to watch the show. That is not the world we live in anymore. Now, I'm in the middle, and the show has to come to me. Right? We've changed. Now, if I want to watch a TV show, I watch it anytime I want. I watch it on my television, or my phone, or my tablet, or my Xbox, or my PlayStation, and I do it anytime I want. We've fundamentally changed the relationship between the people who make content and the people who consume it. What does this mean? Here is a graph of movie tickets, and the sales of movie tickets. This is from America. I don't know how well it will translate, but in 1945, the average American went to 30 movies a year. 20 years later, by 1965, the average American went to 5 movies a year, and that stayed pretty constant ever since. Quick quiz for the class. What happened between 1945 and 1965 that made that difference?
TV.
Television, right? Turned out you could have video entertainment, but you could have it in your house. And that was cheaper and more convenient, and so that's what people did. I gotta tell you, that's gonna happen again. Right now we're very excited about making things like location-based theme parks, and we should be, and that's a good business. In the long run, people are gonna do things in the way that is most convenient to them, in their homes. We have a saying in America or England, we use this phrase, home theater. But what home theater means, the way we use it in English, is actually home cinema. It means we have a big TV screen and we have a big bunch of speakers, and it's just like being in a cinema, but it's in your own home. I'm going to talk about a different kind of home theater. I'm going to talk about how you turn your actual home into an actual theater where actual plays and stories happen inside the walls of your house. They're not just held inside a TV screen. And the way we're going to do things like that is by using various XR technologies like virtual reality or mixed reality, combined with things like Internet of Things and smart homes to create an entertainment space that is your space. What happened to movies and TV is going to happen to the kind of work that we're all interested in right now. It's going to come home, and when it does, that's where people will mostly consume it. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. I promise you I will go somewhere different with it. When my daughter had her 11th birthday, she came out of her room and she was crying. And I asked her, "Why are you crying? It's your birthday, you should be happy." And the reason she was crying is that she did not get her letter from Hogwarts. On your 11th birthday, you're supposed to get a letter that says you get to go to a magical school for wizards. What I said last year is we need to fix that. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we're going to fix that so that your daughters, when they are 11, and sons, get their letter. And I'm going to give you some of the tools to do that. Here's what I want to have happen. I want for your kids, I want an owl from Hogwarts Academy to fly in the window and perch on a lamp or the back of a chair or sit on the end of the bed and drop a letter that unrolls and says that your child indeed is a wizard and indeed needs to change the world with her magic. Then I want her to hear a voice from the living room saying, "Caitlin, Caitlin, Harry Potter needs your help." And she's going to get up and run out of her room to the living room, and there she's going to meet a character from Hogwarts who's going to tell her that there's a special thing that only she can do, and is going to lead her into the kitchen and say, "Get a bowl of water, and I need you to learn to cast a spell that will let you see what's happening in Hogwarts right now." And she'll get a bowl of water, and he'll get her to learn the incantation Divinarium. And she'll learn to say it, and when she says it right, the surface of the bowl of water will suddenly fill with an image, and she'll see in the cellars of Hogwarts there's a giant snake slithering up the stairs, and he's just eaten Argus Filch, and what is she going to do about it? Because that's what your 11th birthday ought to be like. Okay, let's talk about what it takes to make that actually happen. Or, wait a minute. If there's anyone who didn't want to do that on their 11th birthday, the rest of this talk may not be for you. But I'm just assuming that all of us here, one way or another, wanted something like that to happen. Okay, what does it take to tell a story in your own space? You need to create the characters in the story. Those characters need to be able to move around your space in a rational manner. Like when the owl comes, it needs to perch on a lamp, not hang in midair with one wing stuck through a wall, right? It has to understand the space it's in. And once it's there, you and that owl or that character need a way to interact. So let's talk about some tools we can use to build those things. First off, ways to make characters. So the first thing I'll talk about is something called volumetric capture. That's where you get a human actor to deliver a performance, you capture it, and then you can replay it in someone's home. Magic Leap's been doing a bunch of experiments with this stuff. We have a nice studio of our own in Culver City, and we've also built one in London. And we've been working with the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I will show you a little piece that we did with them. It's one of the actors in the Royal Shakespeare Company delivering the 7 Ages of Man speech from my favorite Shakespeare comedy, As You Like It. Everything in this room, slightly dim at the moment, is real. That's a real painting, a real coffee table, real chairs. The only thing that's not real is the actor who's going to come perform. And by the way, I've edited the 7 Ages of Man to 4 Ages of Man because we only got so much time.
The world is a stage. All the men and women really play it. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. His acts being 7 ages. At first, the infant, fueling and puking in the nurse's arms, Then the whining schoolboy with his satchel and shining morning face, creeping like snail unwillingly to school. And then the lover, sighing like furnace, with a woeful ballad made to his mistress' eyebrow. Last thing of all, that ends this strange, eventful history, is second childishness and mere oblivion. Someone's teeth, someone's eyes, someone's taste, someone's head.
So, one of the things that we learned from that is good actors are good, and you should get them if you can. Volumetric capture, the plus side of it is it's a human being doing it. So the performance is as good as your actor, it looks like a person, it's very relatable. The downside is it's not very interactive. If you come from a game space or something like it, if in the middle of that, after the third age of man, you had said, wait, what was the second age of man? He can't stop and answer you, right? He just has to roll out whatever was recorded. There's no way for him to dynamically interact with you. Obviously, video games have been solving this problem for 35 years, right? And there's a very well-developed kit for making characters that can interact inside a game engine or the like. And I'll show you a little clip from one of our projects for Dr. Gordworks doing a more classically interactive character.
Nothing about that. So, the Imperial Turn Defense Force, eh? That's the right and a bloody dangerous one at that. Successes, failures, toilet breaks, it'll all be tracked in great detail. Complete your objectives, and you're bound to progress up the ranks. Assuming you live long enough, you will be richly rewarded. How bloody exciting is that? As if not time wasn't more enough. All right, soldier, to the pit, and good luck on your first mission.
There's a fun little thing about this. Just on the side, a clever piece of showmanship. Because the human character is clearly a holograph and just being displayed, it makes the robot character feel more real, right? By making the other one look more artificial, it makes this one feel more like something that's actually in your living room. It's a clever little bit of stage business. Okay, we understand these things pretty well. They're super interactive, and we've got 35 years of practice in making them respond to what users do. The downside is they look like things from a game. They feel like things from a game. That's not necessarily bad. There's been super interesting work done, that there are a lot of situations in which more gamey characters are actually easier for people to relate to. There's some interesting work someone was telling me about when you have psychologists, for instance, and you're doing therapy. People find it easier to talk to a robot than to talk to someone that looks like a real person. They feel less likely that they will be judged or that someone else will share their story around. But it is gamey, and if you want to do certain kinds of work, it automatically makes it feel more artificial. So, third option is to make a virtual human. Some of you have seen this before. If you haven't, I envy you because I found this really mind-blowing. This is a project called Mica that Magic Leap has been working on. Take a look. So this is another level of making a CGI person that looks human, right? She's going to go through some tests and then make some human expressions. The first time I was in a room with Mica, I came home, and what I said to my family is, it's like being in a room with a person. It's a person made of light. It's not a human person. It's a person like an elf. it's shocking how realistic that can feel. And she has a whole bunch of emotional responses and behaviors. So when you get too close to her, she sort of gives you the hey creep back off face and edges away from you. There's a lot of work that's going into making her feel real in some interesting ways. There are also problems working with something that has this high degree of fidelity. Anyone who's ever worked with animation or CGI knows that if your characters are simple, like the one in the last clip, you don't have to worry about matching all their mouth movements when they talk. Something that's this realistic, making the mouth movements look right when she talks, is super hard. In the long run, we'll crack that, but it's an interesting vision of what's coming. All right. There are other options you can go with, and some of you, for instance, in LBEs are working with live human actors, mixing with these things. It gives you another template to work with. We're not going to be able to port that to your home, or at least not at a price point. So these are the kinds of possibilities you have for creating characters. Once we have a character in your home, it has to be able to move reasonably through your home, not walk through the coffee table, not get stuck in the wall. When it walks behind something, you shouldn't be able to see it. I happen to work with a team in Seattle, and one group in that Seattle office decided that what the world really, really needed more than it needed anything else was a way to bring virtual baby goats into your house, which I think is a no-brainer, obviously. We need more virtual baby goats. But the real purpose of this, besides the fact that baby goats are hilarious, was to solve the problem of how can I scan the room you're in very, very fast and map it out and then translate it from the machine vision into something that you can use to move game characters or 3D constructs around, understanding the space. This, what I'm going to walk you through, is a sequence of code that's been written. It's for anyone to use. So if you're working on a project for Magic Leap that wants to put virtual characters in real environments, you can just have this code, and we'll talk to you. The engineers will help you through how to deploy it so that you can make your stuff. I'm looking at Nathan in the back, because I know he's got a project that this would work for. Okay, how do we put virtual objects in real space? I'm going to show you a little sequence of videos here. Here is a baby goat. Everything in this room is real except the goats. You notice when it passes behind the chair, you can't see it. It's called occlusion, and you have to have that to make it feel good. The goats know that when they're up on the coffee table, if they want to be on the floor, they have to jump down. If they want to go up, they have to jump up. We have to find ways that they understand the environment that well. I will show you how this is done. It's using something called the dense mesh adapter. So it scans the room that returns a mesh. It's a mapping computer vision speak of the room. It then translates that mesh into game engine primitives. In other words, it takes the mesh that machine vision returns and throws it into Unity or Unreal so that that space is now understood as a Unity or Unreal environment. And that means you get all the stuff that a game engine has. It means that if you throw a ball against the wall will come back the way it should because the game engine understands how to do that. It also assigns points of interest throughout the room that you can use for pathing, meaning how the baby goats know to go from one place to another. Okay? The next video I'm going to show you, this is with the debugger running. This is what it looks like to the device as it's scanning the room, translating it into Unity, and the information up there allows your engineer to sort of see what's going on and whether or not anything's going right or wrong. You see it's working at about 35 frames a second now, which is pretty good for this stuff. You see the scan rate's pretty fast, right? Like an ordinary user is not going to notice any lag or latency because we're not unless you're making a first-person shooter or something like that. Okay. Once you have established this as a 3D environment, all the blue lines are possible paths to move up and down or between things. Once we've turned this now into a 3D environment inside an engine, it means we can do all the things that we know how to do from video games. Like, we have a character, that character has a motivation, it now understands how to move through the room. It lets the owl perch on the lamp. Right? Does that make sense? In this case, we now have physics, occlusion, pathing, and motivated behavior. Talked one slide to. We're like, here's an example. In this, we shoot a little pellet of food somewhere in the room, and the goat's going to go get the food, and using the pathing and its knowledge of the room, it now, without us telling it, go to that bench, it just follows, go to wherever the food is, and it understands how to get there because that's implicit in the map of the room. Does that make sense? Am I going too fast? You're all tracking this, yeah? Feel free to say no. I know what you're asking next. I know the thought in your head is, sure, that's fine. But what if the goats were fired out of cannon and then abducted by aliens? Admit it, that's what you were thinking, right? Well, as it happens, I'm glad you asked. With the debugger working, we're now going to fire, oh my god, the tiny goat went, and the spaceship, and oh, that's not right. Turning it into 12 goats at the end. All right. You understand, I think from that this tool set is available, and anyone who wants to work for the Magic Leap, talk to me or get in contact with me afterwards, and I can set you up with the engineers so you can just have this code and use it in your own projects. Okay, once we've established our characters and we have the characters meaningfully in the environment, the next question is, how can we interact with them? This happens to be Magic Leap Suite. It's not the only possible one, but controller, everyone who's ever played a game knows how to use a controller. We can track your eye gaze. What you're looking at, we can see where your head is turned. We can do some work with gestures. We got to make this better, but it works. I'm especially excited about using voice. I don't like using controllers unless I have to. I think it's more natural to be able to use my voice to interact with characters. And we also have a mobile app, and you can even do a keyboard, but let's not talk about those because those are not as fun. Well, the mobile app can be fun. There's clever stuff you can do with it. So, everyone understands controller, right? I move a character or an object around my environment. Controller plus gesture. There's a fun one in the game that I showed you the intro from, the Dr. Borgwart's game. You're using your controller to basically fire a gun, but with your other hand you can throw up a shield, just with a gesture of your hand. How about controller plus voice? Okay, this is the most famous one that everyone has wanted to do for 15 years, right? Wingardium Leviosa. Right? We got to be able to cast a spell. Honestly, if you can't cast a spell in mixed reality, I don't want to talk to you yet. Like, wake me up when I can cast magic spells. Gesture and voice. Don't know how common this reference will be in China, but another life-changing thing that happened to me when I was 11 years old as the movie Star Wars came out, and for the last, let's say, 12 years since I was 11, I have wanted to be able to say, these are not the droids you're looking for. You can go on your way. We can do that. We can do that right now, today, with stuff that we've built. There's no reason you can't build an environment that lets you have that moment in a story. Okay, this one's a little more of a stretch. If you saw my panel earlier this morning, you probably know where I'm going with this. There's a famous episode of Doctor Who called Blink, created basically to make the world's cheapest special effect, which is, you have in the background you have a sinister looking weeping angel, And the whole plot of the story basically is that if you ever look away or blink, it gets closer to you. Closer and closer and closer, and if it ever touches you, you die. So, because I'm spooky that way, I went to the engineering team at Magic Leap and said, hey, can we build Blink? And we can, because eye gaze is a thing we can do. So if I combine my smart home and my eye gaze, I can have the lights suddenly flicker up and down, and then when I look over to my left, there's a creepy statue there, and then a rumble comes from out of the speakers of my Alexa or my Google Home or whatever your home device is, and a moment later there's a flash from the next room as the light comes on, and when I look back, the statue is closer and closer and closer. And it's super creepy and terrifying, and if you're not here to make super creepy, terrifying things, why are you here? Well, I will accept making people fall in love as an answer, because that's also good. I'm going to do a very short version of how you might sort of string these things together into a story to sort of make it a little less choppy. So I'll tell a very short story, then I'll wrap up and we can do some questions. I've been working for the last 3 years with another science fiction writer named Neil Stevenson at Magic Leap, creating a big world, big fantasy sci-fi world, which is based on the premise that there's another world next door to ours with a different timeline, where history has gone slightly differently. And in one part of it, it turned out that in about the year 1000, we discovered that magic actually works. And in that timeline, they never really did science because magic worked. And we call that world Old Gnarly. Here's a little story about how we might do something from there. So imagine that I'm working late. I'm tired. Kids are in bed. But I begin to hear the sound of the wind coming up, which is odd because I'm indoors. But I hear the sound of a wind coming through tree leaves, maybe a little gust of rain. And when I look up, yes, I'm wearing my Magic Leap device. Work with me. When I look up, I see little dancing gold motes of light, sort of like leaves or thistle down or dandelion spores, but glowing. And they're all moving through my living room as if blown by a wind. They're all going one direction. And I get up and I follow them, and they leave my living room and they go down the hallway to the door down into the basement. And these golden things stream down into the basement, and from the basement I can hear the noise like the wind growing stronger, and also a sound that seems slightly like pigs. I don't know. It's an unusual thing. I've never had pigs in my basement. And as I continue down the stairs, things ripple, and I find myself in my basement, but it's not quite my basement anymore. And in fact, I look through the door, and in the door is a mirror, and looking back is me. It's a guy who looks like me, but he has a beard, and he's dressed like a character from the 1500s. And there are a couple of kids who remind me of my kids, plus a third kid that I don't recognize. And the guy who is me but not me says to me, my daughter has been injured, and our magic can't save her. She's hurt her leg, it's become infected, we don't know what to do. But the red lady in the tower said that if we talk to you in your world, they know how to cure this kind of infection. Can you help me? I know you have daughters like I do, because we're just the same person on two sides of the world. You know how much this means to me. Please help. So I don't know what to do. I see my basement, but not quite my basement, and my family, but not quite my family, and they're not pigs, they're goats in my basement. So I go upstairs and I try to think, what can I do to help this girl's infected leg? So I go on the computer and I look it up, because I don't have magic, but I do have computers. And I find out, what do you do for infection? Well, we use antibiotics. So I can't send him to the drugstore, but it turns out there are ways to make antibiotics with bread mold, or with the mold that grows on oranges or melons. And so from the computer, I write down the steps to make an antibiotic, and I run down to the basement, and I tell the other me, listen, do this, and I think it will help her leg. And I talked to him each day for 3 days. And at the end of 3 days, her leg is starting to heal. So I go this time up the stairs to my attic. And once again, as I'm getting close to the top of the attic, the world shimmers and changes, and now it looks like my attic, but it also looks different. And at the side of the attic, I see there are leaves on the floor, the ones that I heard drifting down from the top at the beginning of the experience. And there's a beautiful woman in a red dress, and she has a rat's tail from the bottom of the dress. And she says, "I'm very impressed with you. I have another task for you. Here's what I want you to do. You can make up your own next chapter of the story." But perhaps that gives you an idea of how we can combine your house, your lights, devices that will show things, that will modify the environment you're really in, characters, to create a story that you can have in your home. The last thing I wanted to say, I hope it's clear that I'm pretty excited about this age of the world. I really wanted to go through that closet to find a magical world. I never could, but I've tried to let other people go through. And I'm extremely excited about the opportunities we have today to let people not just read about Lucy going to Narnia or read about Harry going to Hogwarts, but to go. I want them to go. This is an exciting time. In the last 30,000 years of human history, there have been, I would argue, 5 events in the history of storytelling. First, storytelling. Man around a campfire tells a story. Woman tells a story to her children. 2, theater. We decide to act out a story, several of us, and we put it on for the rest of the people around the campfire. 3, the printing press. Now we take a story that a storyteller makes and we make it scalable, to use a term from our industry, so that many, many people can experience it. 4, the movies, cinema. 5, this, now. In all of human history, we now are at one of the only 5 times that storytelling is changing. And that's incredibly exciting. And it won't be me who makes the real stories of that form. I'm too old. I started before we were here. It will be the people in this room who make the stories that are truly part of this future. One of the things we talk about a lot, one of the challenges we face, and people will say it, someone's already said it to you sometime during this conference, is interactivity wars with story, right? They don't play well together. And nobody knows that more than a novelist, because I started writing books where I have absolute control. And instead I've been creating all these things where the players get to mess it up. And you have to constantly find something for them to do. And why don't they just sit there and be quiet like they're watching a movie and understand your work of art? Do you remember my daughter? When she was 2, she was a handful. She was super active all the time, and she slept 2 hours a night less than the books promised me they would. She got up every morning at 5 a.m. And I spent those years just wishing she would just sit down and be quiet and sit still. She's 28 now. She's beautiful and she's smart and she knows things I don't know, and she's an incredibly interesting person. And none of that is because she sat down and was still. It's because she explored, and because she had her own thought and her own growth. As much as we want audiences to sit down and just take what we give them, in the long run, this art isn't defined by VR or MR or a machine or an Alexa. It's defined by the change in our relationship to the audience. The fact that they are co-creating this work with us, that they, like my daughter, have to run around, have to explore, and become something that we couldn't make entirely on our own. And if there's nothing else you take away from this talk, maybe the idea that we can build these kind of amazing experiences for people to explore and grow into will be the thing that you take away. And if there are any questions.
Thank you very much for the extremely magic and attractive and interesting sharing. Thank you.
Questions, anyone?
现场的朋友有要提问题的吗？
I have a question is when we are designing some like stories, like adventure stories in some LB entertainments, we also we already find some ways like turn some people into a giant scale, and also like you can really touch something in physical way that you saw them in a virtual reality. But do you have any suggestions about how to make it more fun and to not only to try to create some interesting and astonishing new feeling, but also about the profound story feeling of the adventure?
Okay, super great question, which is when we're working, I'm going to try to say it back to you and see if I've got it right. You're learning a lot about how to use the medium like VR, for example, to create amazing experiences that you couldn't have elsewhere. Like suddenly you're 30 feet tall or you're really tiny, stuff that you could never do. But beyond the tricks that go with that, are there certain ways to make it feel more emotional, more compelling? I think we're all trying to find that out together. I'm going to tell a quick story because I got 5 minutes and 40 seconds that maybe answers a little bit of that. It's going to first seem like I'm not going anywhere. I apologize for that. The same daughter I mentioned earlier, she has a signal. Someone will say, hey, should we have pizza for dinner? And then Dad will say, in 1878, a British merchantman set out from Liverpool on a course for Borneo. And everyone will look around and say, where the hell is this going? And my daughter makes this gesture. As a little promise to the people listening that eventually we're going to come to the point where we started. So I made an experience a few years ago where there was a character in the experience. It happened online and it happened over a few weeks, so there was time. And there was a character online who was dead. He was a ghost. But he could help you out a little bit in exchange for you helping him out a little bit. This part was called small favors. And basically, if you do a small favor for him, he would do a small favor for you. And an example that I've given before of probably the most successful small favor is he asked you, in exchange for his help, please go to a cemetery and find the grave of someone who died on the day you were born. And just do something nice for them. And people all over the country went out and did this. They went to graveyards or cemeteries and they found the grave of someone who died on the day they had entered the world, someone who left it the day they came in. And they cleaned off the grave, or maybe they left flowers, or maybe they wrote a poem. Whatever they wanted to do was fine. And they came and shared it with the other people who were doing this experience. And not one, but many people afterwards said that was the most profound artistic experience they'd ever had, more than any book or any movie. Because you know what? It was them, at the gravesite, bringing to it all their own experience of mortality and loss and love. To come around to your question, I think one of the things we think about the least, we think about how do we manage to get our audiences, how do we give them interaction without them breaking what we're making? But we often fail to remember that when we give them interaction, we've actually opened up another artistic tool for ourselves. Your audience is paint. Your audience is canvas. If you think about it, I try to look for ways in which they can bring their own emotions and their own experiences into a moment. So I will try to when I'm writing a novel, I try to write about experiences that people have about childhood or family or whatever. when I'm building interactive experiences, I like to do the same. A way that I can allow them to bring their own emotion into the moment, so that it's not just me making an experience they have to have, but the two of us making something together, even if I don't control exactly what they're going to bring.
Yeah, that's a very good answer. Thank you.
And super long, which is, pretty much how I roll.
I see. I really love your concept of co-create. So I just want to ask, is there any suggestions on how to break the boundary between virtual reality and reality? Like we just make the storytelling or the game happen in daily life, or in society with a social feature. People get together and co-create.
So, before I worked at Magic Leap, I did something called alternate reality games, or ARGs, and I am incapable of answering your question short enough in the time we have left, but let's talk afterwards, because I've thought about almost nothing besides that for 15 years. Short version, yes, social is hugely important. When we make, I said this earlier today, so sorry for the repetition, but now when we make a book or a movie, we have to understand that part of the use of that book or movie is for the audience to go away and make memes, or make their own versions, or write fan fiction. It is, among other things, a seed for them to do their thing. And that thing is a social and community thing. One of the interesting facts about this age is that a work of art is no longer just between me and you. It's between me and you, and then whoever you share your response with on social media. As creators, we have to understand that the audience is always multiple. Even if I just do one thing for you right now, ultimately you're going to turn around and share that with the rest of the people you know, and you're together going to create a response to it. And I think that's a good thing, and we should be constantly trying to make that possible. Last thing, the very first of these interactive projects I did was in the year 2001. And I was talking to the guy whose idea was first, and he said, by the way, did you know that this year, for the first time in history, sales of video games have gone down in Japan? And I said, why? And he said, they were outcompeted by a superior entertainment form. I said, what was that? He said, mobile phones. You cannot make anything more riveting for a teenager than another teenager. So instead of fighting that, work into it. All right, I've got 5 seconds left, so I'm going to say thank you.
再次感谢双给我们带来精彩的分享，谢谢。